bond between Israel and the U.S. is unshakable. Israel's former deputy foreign minister and Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Danny Ayalon spoke to DW this week about whether the Iranian nuclear deal has been a game changer in the relations between the U.S. and Israel. DW: Have U.S.-Israeli relations been damaged in light of the Geneva Agreement? Danny Ayalon: Israel-U.S. relations will not be affected by the agreement in Geneva with Iran. Yes, we do have our apprehensions, we do have our criticism, but this is something that is legitimated between allies, just as we have our different points of view about settlements or about what should be the content of agreement with the Palestinian. The unshakable bond between Israel and U.S. is going to last on the natural alliance and political strategical value of this alliance. Israel has proven again to be the only indispensable ally for the U.S. in the region in terms of American interests, in terms of countering and fighting proliferation of nuclear weapons, which is one of the most important things for American stability. How would you characterize relations at the moment between the U.S. and Iran? I think it's very important to note that under President Obama, the military cooperation and relationship between Israel and the U.S. has reached at an all-time high, and this continues. It's not just the administration though, it's also Congress. It's the people and the nationwide support that Israel enjoys in the U.S. This will not change, although Israel has criticized and will continue to criticize the agreement with Iran. What do you think is behind the thinking of the Iranian leadership? The Iranians see two models, in terms of non-proliferation or in terms of dismantling the nuclear capabilities. They see Libya under the Gaddafi model, and they see the North Korean model. Libya under Gaddafi voluntarily dismantled their capabilities, and where is Libya now? Where is Gaddafi now? On the other hand, a decade ago, a North Korean went through what seemed like a consensual route, and boom! After a few years, they detonated a nuclear device. For the Ayatollahs, the nuclear capability is not just an objective in itself. It's a means for two things: to become the hegemony and the dominant force in the Middle East. Secondly, to put down the Sunni countries like Saudi Arabia, and lastly their own internal stability. By becoming nuclear, they believe it will be an insurance policy for them. The 6 parties involved in talks in Geneva should not be fooled by the charm offense of the Iranians because the Iranian came to Geneva not as a consequence of a policy change, but as a consequence of their being on the brink economically. The main goal of Iran is to lift the sanctions, and they have managed to do that without giving up any of their potentials. Why does Israel's leadership think the Geneva Agreement is bad? I believe that this agreement is bad on all accounts. It's not going to stop a nuclear Iran. Because of the message, it's going to make stabilizing the region much more difficult. It's going to induce more negative energy into the region in terms of terrorism, in terms of the Sunni-Shia clashes, and it's quite obvious to foes and friends alike of the West that Iran has the upper hand. The danger is that Iran keeps the nuclear potential, the capabilities and the initiatives in the hands of ayatollahs. Any time in the future they can resume. They can actually accelerate their nuclear program. The fact that Iran was on break was not used well diplomatically by the Sikh parties in the talks, because they could have gotten much more out of Iran. Iran played a brilliant game when they made the P5+1 blink first. The message to the region is that the belligerency of Iran pays off and that strengthens Assad, Hezbollah, and all the very extreme radical forces. It also creates the counter-offensive by the Sunni extremists. Where does this leave Israel? I think Israel's hands are now tied and there is no option at this point but a diplomatic option. Now it's just a matter of keeping Iran committed and answerable to the letter of the Geneva Agreement. I don't think that this will be very simple to do. If a country is determined, they can really overcome any monitoring regime, even the most robust. The last opportunity the international community has will be when the terms of the agreement are up in 6 months. When the P5+1 comes to the table for the final status agreement with Iran, this is the time to make all the demands with Iran. I don't think the Middle East and the world can tolerate or survive a nuclear Iran. Unfortunately, it's being painted as if the duel in the Middle East is between Tehran and Jerusalem. Is not the case. The threat of Tehran is first and foremost to the Gulf countries, to the Sunni countries, then to Israel, and then to Europe. If you look at their delivery systems and their ideology, it does not stop only in the Middle East. Are there influential, important political voices in Israel that would advocate military action? I would say nobody would advocate military action. This is not our preferred way to solve the Iranian threat. I believe that we will still have a few months before we see the developments, especially on the comprehensive agreement with Iran. But to say that this is not an option, I think is a mistake. Israel does have the capabilities if they needed to. I am not advocating this, but it should not be ruled out. Has Israel made any mistakes in the past in dealing with Iran, and what would you suggest Israel does in the future? I don't say Israel made any mistakes. I think it was not in Israel's interest to make it look like it's a duel between Jerusalem and Tehran. Israel represents the entire international community's interest. In terms of raising the awareness internationally about a threat from Iran, I think that we did a pretty good job. It was Israel who was the first in 1996 to realize and analyze the ambitions of Iran. At that time, it was very difficult to mobilize international interest on Iran, and people were looking at it in a skeptical way. But we were proven right. What we could do, we have already done. Of course, we now have to consider our own national security. I think we have to reserve all the options. I have no doubt that it would be much better for an international coalition to take care, if need be, to militarily dismantle Iran. It's much better than if Israel did it. The option should be kept on the table if we want to see peaceful diplomatic results. As for the future, aside from conservation and backdoor diplomacy, I don't think there is much more we can do. Taiwan journalists strive for more independence. A new group in Taiwan wants to address the threats independent reporting in the country faces on multiple fronts. New advertising models and a series of buyouts by Chinese companies are changing Taiwan's media landscape. If you claim to be an independent media operation in Taiwan, you automatically lose half of your credibility. That was journalist Mario Yang critical assessments at the recent founding forum for an association of independent journalists in Taiwan. Yang also says the public generally doesn't trust domestic media and that journalists enjoys little respect. In contrast to the People's Republic of China, Taiwan's massive media have a pluralistic orientation. The internet is not censored, and the country has freedom of expression laws. Despite a more colorful media landscape, however, the public opinion of news reporting is dropping. The reason: government broadcasters dominate the electronic media market, while newspapers are controlled by conglomerates stirred partly from abroad. Dueling at revenue. Media scholar Chen Shu-hua says the primary reason for Taiwanese audience skepticism results from the media's close ties to the political apparatus. The government is now the biggest advertising client for press outlets, occasionally taking out full-page ads in newspapers and magazines. The researcher describes this as a long-term liability for publishing houses' reputations. Chen Shunhua also sees a shift in businesses approaching to advertising as a further fact in the media's loss of credibility. Their campaigns, he says, are based far more on product placement and surreptitious advertising, which consumers perceive as disruptive. But reporters critical of these developments are hoping their newly formed association will usher in a new era of independent journalists in Taiwan. They plan to create their own online platform for neutral reporting, and the group has already seen a number of early successes. A series of scandals involving expropriated assets. Cases of the bird flu and the use of dangerous pesticide in agriculture were first brought to light by independent journalists. The big media companies only picked up on the same reports later. China's creeping influence. A number of companies from mainland China are using their impressive capital reserves to buy up Taiwanese press outlets, leading Taiwan's hunking neighbor to the West's considerable influence over public opinions. The Shanghai company Wangwang, for example, owns 2 television broadcasters and one of Taiwan's most popular national newspaper. Rice cake manufacturer Wangwang is rumored to have close ties to leaders in Beijing. After Wangwang's takeover, many journalists critical of China lost their jobs. Others left voluntarily, saying they faced limits on criticizing Beijing. The food company's attempt to purchase Taiwan's largest cable provider for a hefty $2.4 billion, 1.76 billion euros, unleashed mass protests in Taiwan. Regulatory officials blocked the purchase last year. During Taiwan's one-party dictatorship, journalists subjected themselves to self-censorship. Now the media bosses are hoping for money from their Communist Party censors, said Chen of the situation. Credibility crisis. The experts in Taiwan agreed that independent forms of mass media have a big role to play going forward. But communications expert Guang Zhengsheng says the general working atmosphere has been poisoned. Independent journalism can only grow if civil society actively gets involved, he said. Only then can the government be controlled efficiently and independently. And that's also the only way to preserve social diversity.